So this week we're talking about two related and kind of intertwined concepts, and that is layout sins as well as the idea of constructive feedback. And these go hand in hand because when we look at Chapter 4 of White Space is Not Your Enemy, it gives us 13 amateur layout errors. Now, I want to be careful here because while the textbook does talk about these sins being amateur, they're sins that all designers commit. We may forget about a concept, or we may decide that the design necessitates breaking that rule or committing that sin. So go back to the wrap-up of last week's discussion if you want a little bit more detail about that idea and about why we don't have to follow every rule. Now, sometimes it could be that we don't want to follow a rule because we're going for a specific kind of design. So what if we're going for counter design on purpose? One example here would be vintage posters. So we did have an example last week, break that down, and I gave you some examples of vintage posters and how they do not follow the Works Every Time layout. I'm sure you could take these 13 sins of layout and look at those vintage posters from World War II and identify a number of sins. But that, again, doesn't mean that we have to follow the rule. We might be going for a specific message or aspect to the message. So don't forget that aspect. But when a flyer or message, instructional messages included, commits a layout sin, and it clearly does not add to the appeal of a layout, how do you provide constructive feedback? So on screen you have a very wonderful example of a layout that commits a number of sins. What feedback would you have for the designers of this flyer? And how would you give that feedback to the designers? So in this course, you're going to have to provide constructive feedback to your peers. As designers, as instructors, as professionals, we have to seek out feedback and we have to be prepared to receive feedback. So I incorporate this aspect into all of my multimedia classes. In the course shell, you'll find a very lovely table that walks you through some simple questions to ask yourself as you're looking at the work of someone else. Use that as your tool in this class and other classes in your professional life when you're asked to give feedback on something. And you'll see that it focuses on having you evaluate what you see based off of the criteria. So in this case, you're evaluating what you see on screen. You're not judging it. You're just evaluating what you see. And you're using those sins of layout as the criteria by which you're evaluating. So that's what we're focusing on this week. Look through the activities, and that should help you as you progress through this concept. Use the on-screen navigation to access another section of this week's overview.